What's going on, everybody? Just Haley here, and I am back again with another video. Now this video is for Gyre, the electric thunder god herself. I love Gyre. She's so much fun. Being able to spread out a ton of damage as well as see those beautiful red and orange crits that you're seeing all the time with her is a lot of fun. The other thing that I tried to build with this is as much flexibility as possible, allowing her to kind of do whatever missions you wanted. One of the things I used to find that I struggled with her was justifying taking her into anything that wasn't a longer mission, and I really feel like this build kind of solves that, but I am going to be giving you 3 build options here today for Gyre. She also does a really great job synergizing with just about any weapon you want to bring out, allowing it to crit really heavily and crit really hard, which is really cool. You can get super crits pretty easily with her. She's a lot of fun to play, and she does work very well in a variety of situations. So I'm going to be showcasing that and kind of showing you guys how I play Gyre, how I solve some of her weaknesses, and go from there. If you guys do like the video, as always, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. It does help me out a ton, and if you guys are interested, check out our stream on Twitch. We're usually there on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and we're going live. I show this build a lot because I do really like bringing out in a lot of different missions, so always an option as well. So without further ado, going right into the build and how I run it, there's going to be 3, and I'm going to be working with 2 Subsumes, so there's realistically 3 arguably 4 you could use on her. Some options that I'm not going to use here, but are options, are Roar and Breach Surge. I do really like those options for her. They're not going to solve her primary issue, but they will give her more damage and more spread. So if you are going to solve the issue with something like Secondary Fortifier and just rely on getting the Eximus to give you your Overguard, that is going to be an option. You can also use Aegis, which I am going to be using in the primary build here, to give you some shields back, but it's not going to be quite as consistent as if you're running a damage reduction source as well to amplify your shields that you do get back so they stay a little bit longer. So those are going to be the main options for the ones that I'm not using. However, if you want to look at Gyre as a frame, there's really 2 key weaknesses that she does have. Without a Subsume, Gyre has the ability to spread tons of lightning and lightning damage everywhere, along with critting really hard. Now what ends up happening though is that you're not stripping off armor with those, which does put you in a position where your damage will get reduced, and your damage doesn't scale quite as high as something like a weapon typically will. So what you're going to end up seeing is that at a point, the armor will get enough that you do want to kind of think about removing it. The other thing that she lacks is a way to get her shields back easily, or something in her kit that is defensive. Both her 1 and her 2 are not that, so even without a Subsume, you aren't going to be seeing that. So where you really want to look at Subsumes, in my opinion, is going to be Subsumes that are going to give you armor strip and some level of defensive ability. Now, if that didn't perk up your ears to what the option is almost guaranteed to be, it's Pillage. Pillage is going to answer every question that she has and be a really, really easy solution for her, but it's not the only option that you have when it comes to Gyre. For me personally, I really liked how simple it was to run something like Nullstar. If you run it with the Augment, you also get Heat Procs. Heat Procs after a few seconds will tick off the armor of the enemy as well, so you do get some armor strip, though it's just a flat 50% over that damage over time. Most of the time you're going to kill the enemies before that matters, but if it ever does become an issue, the Heat Procs will strip off some of the armor from the enemies that you're attacking. The other thing that you're getting though is that 75% damage reduction, which is really good at synergizing with Aegis to allow you to keep some shields up constantly. Things like Brief Respite as well are going to help you get some shields back that are going to be tankier shields, because you're getting 50% base shield damage reduction as well as the 75% from the Nullstar. The combination there does keep you relatively tanky, allowing your shields to just constantly be restoring, constantly be coming back up, especially because of how fast she's killing. Gyre does fall into the category of frames that are a little bit guilty of your tankiness is your ability to kill enemies before they can do anything to you. You're also going to notice a ton of enemies just end up getting CC'd either by the Heat Procs from Nullstar or from the electric that she's spreading around herself. Overall, it's going to be a pretty solid combination to keep her very tanky, but you really can use either Nullstar or Pillage to achieve this, and I'm going to be showing you both builds here as far as what I do. So getting into the build, the main thing that we're using for survivability here is Null Star with Aegis. That combination is going to make it so we can get our shields back really easily. Combine that with Brief Respite so we can get a little bit of shields back whenever we need it, just for those brief instances of shield gating, but also to take some damage into our shields so we can hopefully proc Aegis again. Stack that up with Adaptation versus any faction that isn't going to deal a bunch of Toxin damage. You're going to be really tanky. It's going to make your shields really, really tough, hard to break. That's going to be really strong for this. You're getting 50% at base, 75% in addition, and then another 90% on top of that with your adaptation. For a lot of the fodder, you'll see a lot of the impact, puncture, slash is just always at that 90%. Really easy to maintain. Now we do want to make sure we're running cathode current to make sure we never have to recast our 4s. We can snapshot it for that big power strength buff. It also helps with our energy so that we don't have to worry about that too much. The other thing that's helping with energy is Archon stretch. Now keep in mind we are a little bit tight on energy here, so keep that in the back of your head. If you ever do need to recast things, it can be a little bit rough. You'll need 1 or 2 energy orbs, but it's not that hard to maintain. We are running Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, and Umbral Intensify to up our strength as much as possible. We really want to shoot for that 340-ish mark. Now, not necessary for this build, but for some other builds. However, more power strength is always going to be more better for her, and that's why we do run Molt Augmented as well. 400% power strength puts that Cathode Grace at a really, really nice point where it's a lot of damage. As for what ability you want to subsume, honestly, it's personal preference. I personally like the larger radius of the 2. So because the 2 is a little bit larger range, I run with that. However, if you don't like how the 2's physics are, kind of like your bowling, then you can run with the 1 instead and subsume off the 2. That is completely personal preference, whichever one you like more. The 1 will create a few more electric procs, but you usually don't need that many anyway, so it's really up to you. That is going to bring us into our 2 other builds for Gyre. We're going to be using Pillage on both of these builds. They are very similar, but slight differences. So the top build is the more comfy build. The comfy build is going to be using Corrosive Projection. And then we're going to be using Prime Flow. That's going to allow us to have a little bit more energy buffer, but it is excessive to a crazy degree, so you really don't need all of this energy, especially because you're not casting abilities that often except for Pillage. It's really easy to keep up the energy needed for Pillage on this build, so it's really excessive. But the other thing that you're getting out of this is the ability to run Corrosive Projection. It drops your power strength need from 343 down to about 318, right? So you could theoretically lose one of those red shards if you wanted to, that we're going to be running. I'll show you the shards in just a second. The other build is going to want those red shards that I'm going to show you, but that's going to be using a low combat discipline so we don't lose too much health, because we don't want to end up murderizing ourselves too hard with that. And because of that, we do end up needing the full Umbral setup with all of the formas and stuff. If you don't want to run the low combat discipline, you don't need an Umbral forma in this build at all. You could run that dash polarity there and you're fine for a lot of this. But if you are running that low, really efficient, really hyper maximized combat discipline setup with Avenger, that is going to need the full format. For the upper build, you're going to see Energize in there again. It's kind of excessive, but it is just for that comfy build. And then for the Avenger, it's going to give you more of that flat crit, which is going to allow your abilities to crit a little bit easier, a little bit harder, as well as your weapons become a little bit more optional. Things like the new core become really strong because you're adding so much crit to them. The Augur mod for the Discipline build is completely optional. Run whatever you want. If you want a little bit more strength, go with Secrets. If you want a little bit more range, go with Reach. Those are really completely optional. It's one of the biggest options you have in the build for the more advanced build with the Discipline and the Avenger. Keep in mind, Discipline is there to proc your Avenger. That's just going to be completely your option if you want to run something like that. I really like it, but it is not mandatory at all. The other thing that has a little bit of option to it are your shards. Now, I like running 3 red shards here because it's going to get to that 343% strength, which allows you to, with Molt Augmented, run a Pillage and not have to worry about hitting your breakpoint to full strip. You don't necessarily need that, especially since the armor change, but I do really like it. It is an optional red shard here. If you wanted to drop one out, you certainly could. You're also getting way above the minimum that you would need if you're running Corrosive Projection. So if you're running the Corrosive Projection build and still running your Molt Augmented, you could actually take out all of these shards and run it really freely there. You won't full strip at the very beginning, but you will eventually. We're also getting 30% extra damage to enemies affected by lightning procs. I think that's really strong on her. I really like it. It allows every time that you successfully get the lightning 2 proc on an enemy through crits and stuff, you're going to get more and more and more, and it's very, very strong. I really like that. The benefit overall here being that you will get a lot of extra damage into Gyre, which is something she is going to scale very well off of. But if you wanted to lose those and go for more quality of life things, maybe you want more cast speed, maybe you want more energy, stuff like that is going to be optional and pretty effective on her too. Now you're gonna notice that I did shift the gameplay over here to show Infested. One of the biggest reasons that I delayed this video for as long as I did is because Infested is just such an annoying type for her to have to fight. There is a really easy solution to that, and it is Secondary Fortifier. It's going to allow her to be very, very tanky with her Overguard. Realistically, you only need to shoot once, maybe twice into some Eximus, get some Overguard, and then you could swap to your other weapons, go melee, do anything that you want with her until that Overguard goes away. Toxin damage can't damage you, can't kill you with your health through Overguard, so that's really important. And it is the easiest way to make her tanky versus Infested and make her run very, very well versus Infested. Now, I don't really like that as the solution, but it's the best way that I could come up with to make her effective versus Infested without feeling like it was too much sacrifice in her strength. And generally, because her health is where it's at and because of how she plays, it's just kind of difficult to make her survive those toxin damage, Eximus and things like that. Especially the Ancients, those really heavy hits will hurt a lot. Now, this was taken during the time where we were getting way too many Eximus during the section where it was the effect from the Hulvania tile set applying to the regular tile set as well. So there's way more Eximus than there should be, but effectively you just want to pop once or twice. The only thing that ever is going to kill you as Gyre is going to be Eximus or Toxic Ancients specifically, because those are going to have that really, really heavy toxin hit that's going to go through your shields. This was actually the initial spark as to why I started running Nullstar. The extra 75% damage reduction that it gives does apply to those, and it makes her a little bit tankier through them. For at least the first hour or so, you'll notice that you'll pretty much get hit for about half, maybe a little bit more of your health when they do hit you, but at a point they will just one-shot. That's where I think Fortifier comes into play, and it's very, very strong. It's also really easy to run with her because she does get so much damage from all the crit chance that she's adding. If you wanted to run Pillage, certainly don't run it versus the Infested, but it is really strong for any of those armored factions. The other thing that you could do versus Infested is where that's when you go to that Roar, the Breach Surge, that's going to up your base damage from all of her abilities. However, you are going to be losing the extra damage reduction, so it does make her a little bit squishier, but if you're relying on Secondary Fortifier, that's not necessarily a problem. So there are some options here as far as how you want to run it, but overall I think that is the best way to run her versus Infested is just slap on your Nullstar, you get a little bit of heat damage into the enemies, you get a little bit of that damage reduction, and it just feels really, really good. Now, a bit of a higher end strategy for Gyre, like I mentioned, is snapshotting your ability buffs. So the main thing that you're going to want to look for that's the easiest to do is Matarai. The way I have this set up is so that you can run Matarai, you don't need to run Zenuric for her, and that also allows you to run things like Naramon if you prefer Naramon. I'm always a big sucker for Naramon, just keeping your combo count is always really nice. But if you wanted to run Matarai, you would just want to double dash, double void sling with your Matarai. You'll get that extra 40% buff. Really easy to cap that in the very beginning of the mission, and then you would cast the 3. Make sure you have the buff up still whenever you cast the 4, so you can snapshot both of those. The other thing you can use is your Grimoire or your book for an extra 60% ability strength, and that is a very, very strong effect on Gyre because again, she can keep that up forever unless you fall off the map or there's violence or someone like that will turn off your abilities, like just happened to me here. So what that's going to end up meaning is that you will lose the damage buff briefly, but you can get those buffs back really, really easily. The other things that you could use are going to be teammate buffs or things like the relic cracking, ability strength doubling. All of that's really strong and adds a ton of effect to her, makes her very, very strong, and she's really, really powerful with those kinds of things. So always consider running stuff like that. It's a very, very strong effect for Gyre. Now my Grimmoire build looks a little something like this. We're using Invocation and Canticle for those shield recharge as well as the extra power strength. Double Augur setup for a little bit more shield regen on our ability casts as well. And then we are running things like the accelerated isotop and all that kind of stuff just for more fire rate. Now run this however you want. The main two pieces here are going to be the extra power strength and the shield regen. Generally just a really effective build for any frames that you want to carry the book with. However, keep in mind you are losing Fortifier, so again, I still don't recommend running that versus Infested. Always up to you though if you want to do that. The other weapons that I personally recommend, I really like the Nataruk. I think it's a super good synergy with her. It allows the Nataruk to get those extra procs from all the range that you have for the lightning to spread through enemies that you shoot them into. Really good at clearing out hallways. You can run it with any high crit weapon, or you can run it with some of those mid crit weapons and just rely on Gyre's crit to up that even further. Keep in mind that the crit for Gyre is additive for her abilities and multiplicative for weapons, meaning you will add a 10% per electric proc for Gyre's abilities up to a percent, whereas with weapons you are multiplying it as if it was a crit mod. That's really important to mention because you aren't just going to be getting those crazy red crits on every single weapon, but it is going to make weapons that might not normally be able to crit a little bit easier. So keep that in mind. Now this was a long one today, so I will be wrapping up here. If you guys do have any questions about this build, please make sure you guys check out the Discord, check out a stream, something like that, or leave a question in the comments below. Always happy to answer that kind of stuff. Gyre is a really fantastic frame. She's a lot of fun, and she does enable some really cool playstyles if you're ever interested in checking her out. She's a very, very strong, powerful, ability-based frame. I really like her. I think she's a lot of fun, and I do hope you enjoy. If you guys do like the video, if you like the build, please make sure again to like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And as always, I will hopefully see you next time, and I love your faces. Bye.